Recent studies have shown that a person's level of awareness has a direct correlation to their resilience against chronic disease, their likelihood of developing mental illness, and even the level of reported satisfaction in their relationships. But what does it mean to increase your awareness? And how do you get started? In this episode, I'm going to be answering those questions, and I'll give you a roadmap of how your awareness journey might look, which phase of awareness you might be in right now, and how you can get the best out of whatever phase you're in, even if it's not where you want to be. My name is Nikki Levine, and I am a U.S. Marine turned resilience coach. I am a chronic student of all matters related to personal growth, emotional intelligence, and living an integrated and satisfying life. I believe that when people fall in love with their own lives, they can't help but influence other people in really positive and powerful ways. When we are good with ourselves, it's only natural for us to treat others better too. I'm convinced that this is how we can change the world. If you're interested in topics of body-mind connection, emotional intelligence, or if you're just wanting to experience more joy and ease in your life, then go ahead and hit like and subscribe to my channel so that you can see the next time I put this out. You guys know the drill. Before I get started, it's really important for you to understand why you should have awareness on your radar at all. It seems like a really hazy goal when people say that they want to increase their awareness. And naturally, some people think that because it's hazy, it means that it's not very important. By the end of this video, you're going to have a deeper understanding of how your level of awareness is shaping your perception of the world, how it shapes your physical and your mental health, and how it's impacting your potential for having rewarding relationships. There are 3 phases of awareness that we'll be exploring today. I'm sure that there's more than 3 levels, but until I have experienced a new level of awareness, I'm gonna stick to the levels that I know. Let's get into it. When you go through Marine combat training, one of the things that you have to learn is land navigation. And as you go through the course for land navigation, you learn how to read a map, how to calculate distance, how to use a compass, how to find a reverse azimuth. And while most people are probably not going to find themselves in the ordeal of being lost in the wilderness, most of us have experienced a deep sense of feeling lost in our own lives and not knowing what to do next. I was pretty thrilled when I found out that I could apply all of these really practical aspects of my military training into frameworks for getting through emotional and psychological challenges too. I bring this up because when you're physically lost, the first thing that you must do is determine where you are. Once you have identified your location in relation to what's around you, you can start to chart a path, and then you know that you're going in the right direction. In the same way, knowing where you are right now is the first and most important step. It's okay if you don't like where you are, because you don't have to stay there. The first level of awareness is the unconscious state. If this level had a mascot or an avatar, it would be an autopilot. Because in this state, there is no taking in of information when it comes to making decisions. It is a purely functional, unthinking mode of operation. So it's important to remember this is also the default state of the human being. It is really important for people to realize that this is where everyone starts, because there does not need to be any shame around being in this state of awareness. You don't need to backslide in life to end up being unconscious. You just have to not progress to the next level. While it is perfectly normal to experience this level of unawareness, it does have a negative impact on your life if you stay there indefinitely. In this level, you don't know what you don't know. You don't notice your patterns. You might even think that you don't have any patterns. So you haven't thought about why you make certain decisions. You just kind of make them, and then you react to the consequences just as automatically as you made the decision. So you're not likely to question your own perception of anything, because you believe there's nothing to question. In this phase, it feels like things are always happening to you. The world might feel like it's completely against you. You might even think that you're cursed. So you feel like there's no way out of this situation and that things are always going to be like this. This is the result of operating from within what's called the external locus of control. People who view the world with an external locus of control feel like they're not in control of their own life. They tend to blame their behavior on what's happening externally. They usually respond really impulsively and emotionally to situations, and they probably feel really helpless every time challenges come up. Another sign of the unconscious state is that you are chronically distracting yourself. You do not want to be alone with your thoughts, so you spend a lot of time with a screen in your face, and you probably stay really, really busy up until the time it's time to go to bed. And even then, when you go to bed, it's probably your least favorite time of the day because that's when you're actually left alone with your thoughts. You're really just trying your best to avoid feeling the stress and the anxiety that comes with the problems, so you're responding by avoiding them. And while it might give you temporary relief, it's not a long-term solution. There's always gonna be more problems. You just kind of end up letting the problems compound more and more and more. And it's easy to see how that can become a runaway situation for anxiety. Another sign that someone is unconscious is that they feel defensive and dismissive anytime that they are criticized. So one way that this can really show up is when someone has a difficult time apologizing. When I say apologizing, I mean the two-word apology. I'm sorry. Nothing else. No, I'm sorry. But if someone has a hard time just leaving it at I am sorry, they're really trying to make the problem the issue of interpretation instead of what it was that they said. It's a lot easier on the mind to assume that someone interpreted something incorrectly instead of owning up to the fact that you did or said something that hurt somebody's feelings. Most of us don't want to be Another sign you might be unconscious is if you're in the habit of looking to other people to solve your problems. So you often wait to be rescued by someone else, or you wait for the problem to just go away. And you might even find yourself blaming your parents for why you are the way you are and how things ended up the way that they did. Even though you're grown now and not living with them, you still find yourself talking about how you grew up as though that has all the bearing on the choices that you have now. The reason that you're doing this is because you don't believe that you have the adequate resources or the confidence, the knowledge, the self-control, whatever it is. You don't think you have that in order to change your life. Another sign is black and white thinking. People who use all or nothing language have a hard time discerning nuance. So one way you know that someone is using all or nothing thinking is if you hear words like always, never, I always end up in this situation. This always happens to me. It'll always be this way. Things are never going to be different. I never get a second chance. Or even the term I can't. And usually this is the brain's attempt to keep the world in neat little categories because it causes the brain too much stress to consider something that is not neatly categorized. So that is your brain trying to reduce its workload, but unfortunately, it's not very accurate. Another sign that you're unconscious is if you're in the habit of numbing out or otherwise sedating your emotions. So you can do that through the obvious ways like substance abuse or if you have an addictive vice. Another one that people may not realize is numbing out is toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is effectively someone denying that bad things happen or that something is unpleasant. It's much easier for them to just insist that everything is fine because deep down inside, they're afraid that it's not and they have to believe that everything's fine and they cling to it. And if you're caving into addictive vices, just understand that the reason you're doing that is because you have found that that is the most effective way for your brain to give you the happy hormones. You don't really know how else to get it. So you're really trying to equalize your emotional state. You're doing it for a perfectly logical reason. The only problem is that a lot of the activities that give us that happy hormone are pretty self-destructive and dangerous. Once you find out a new and better and healthy way to get that same wave of dopamine and serotonin and all that good stuff, it's going to be a lot easier to stick with the good habits. Finally, another sign that you might be unconscious is if you are disassociating or in denial. Disassociation is typically associated with some kind of trauma, and all that means is that at some point your nervous system got overwhelmed and it had a need, the need wasn't met and your brain coped in some other way. That's all a trauma is. And if you're living in denial, you might have a hard time even admitting that something happened, or if it did happen, that it had the impact on you that it had. You might not want to admit that something bothered you or that something stuck with you. You might insist, it's fine, I'm over it. Here are the biggest consequences that happen when you prolong your stay in the unconscious state. Number one, your unwillingness or inability to observe your own behavior means that you're gonna live the same year on repeat. The people that you hang out with, where you go to eat, how you spend your time, your hobbies, your travel habits, if any. Now keep in mind, there are personalities that are like this, so don't cling to this as if, oh, I'm that way, it means that I'm unconscious. This is more about looking at a cluster. The only changes that you are seeing in life are ones that are pretty much being forced on you. Like, you're not consenting to these changes. You're not like, yay, I'm so excited for this change. You probably hate the change. And the problems you do have seem like they're getting worse. And that's because they're compounding, and as you live longer, you get more problems. So if you haven't dealt with old ones and you continue to get new ones, of course it starts to accumulate and wear you out. Another major consequence is you cannot clearly communicate your feelings. One of the biggest ways this shows up is if you have this expectation that other people should be able to guess how you're feeling, even though you haven't told them. Next, your avoidance and your resistance to taking responsibility means that you're not going to take initiative or plan ahead for your future. Another thing you're going to do often is project onto others. Now, let me be perfectly clear about this. Everybody projects. Everybody projects. Everybody projects. Everybody projects. So don't be in denial and say you don't project, because everybody does it. Even people who are aware project. They're just aware that they're doing it. When you project, this is your way of trying to displace a characteristic about yourself that you think is unacceptable and project it onto others and make it about them and what they're doing. By doing this, it makes it much easier to resolve this inner conflict we have with something that we're actually struggling with ourselves. Another sign that you're projecting is if you often have misjudgments about people or situations. These are misjudgments you make when you're pretty confident you had them pinned, right? That's the kind of person that is. This is definitely what's happening. And then later you find out that it wasn't that at all. That can be because in the moment you were projecting something that you were currently struggling with onto the situation. It makes growth impossible if you can't even admit that you're wrong from time to time. If you're not wrong about anything, you're not going to have any sort of incentive to change anything or even look at how you currently do things. Another big consequence is because you are defensive and dismissive of criticism, you're going to have a really hard time with turbulent relationships. And there might even be seeds of resentment that grow between you and your partner. And here's why that is. No one can make you receptive. So if you and your partner are having a disagreement and you're insisting that your partner is seeing it wrong and they're insisting that you're seeing it wrong and there's just no compromise and you guys are sort of battling it out, right? When this happens, your partner doesn't really have a way of making you understand their perception on something. But in most cases, the person who's trying to get you to see things, they care about you and they care about the relationship, and they're bringing it up and talking about it because they're hoping that by bringing it out and airing it out and calling it what it is and talking about it, that the two of you can work it out. So the fact that your partner is bringing it up, or your parent is bringing it up, or your sibling is bringing it up, is because they trust that by doing so, they can work things out with you. So take that to heart the next time that you have a difficult conversation with someone. In most of these cases, your partner might just feel frustrated that they can't make the conditions of the relationship better on their own. It takes two to connect, right? When you talk about connection, it is an absolute implication that there are at least two involved. So they need you to show up on your end, lift that side of the couch, because it's only going to work when both members of the relationship are putting in the same effort. Another big consequence is that you double down on your destructive behavior, like your anger, your hyper independence, or your victimhood. The reason that you do this is because your brain starts creating scenarios for confirmation bias. What that means is that you're going to see exactly what you expect to see, and your brain is going to reject anything that contradicts what you currently believe. And now, because you feel this way, you might be holding a skewed view on the relationship, the world, especially yourself. And it's going to be really hard to consider other perspectives when you believe in your heart that everyone who is not in agreement is just flat out wrong. One of the most heartbreaking consequences of being unconscious is this deep sense of helplessness. So you really end up giving all of your power away, and this is the consequence of victimhood. So I want to tell you guys a story, and it's a little upsetting, but hang with me because the analogy is really beautiful, and I think it does a really wonderful job of painting a picture of what's really going on here. Back when circuses were popular and, they had all the animals that they were training, they would initially, when they got elephants, they would chain them in place to the ground with these really robust, powerful, at the time, the strongest chains that they had. And they would keep these chains on the elephant until they unfortunately broke the animal's spirit with the things that they did to train them. And once they broke the elephant's spirit, they would take the chain off of its leg and they would replace it with standard everyday rope. But after they were traumatized by the way that they were treated, they stopped trying to escape. This is called learned helplessness. So the elephants didn't ever test the chains again. And if they suddenly did decide to test them, they would suddenly be aware that there is nothing holding them there. They are free to go. We all have experiences that pinned us down in some way. So there is some unhappy and dense memory that is fixed into your unconsciousness. So you're not aware it's there, and you're not aware that it's informing how you see the world. It really does color your world. We all have these. Another problem with victimhood is that we end up projecting this really dim future. We think we're always gonna end up used. We're always gonna be forgotten or unloved. And you can't reclaim your life until you stop agreeing with these fake limitations that we have mistakenly identified as hard facts about who we are and about how life is. The last major consequence of being unconscious is this tendency to oversimplify really complex problems. This sort of ties back to the black and white thinking that leads to the us versus them or me versus you mentality. Once again, your brain is trying to make things really simple so that it can process information and make quick decisions. It doesn't matter to your brain that the decision is bad or that the interpretation is wrong. It doesn't care. All it's trying to do is come up with the quickest thought possible. If you don't recognize nuance, then you're not going to be able to find common ground in your relationships, and you're not going to be able to connect with people. That means that you're going to always feel a level of loneliness, of resentment, and of rejection. If you have patience and sit with some of these questions, I promise the natural consequence is moving through this phase and into phase 2.